The sun hung low over the desert plains, casting a golden glow across the rugged terrain that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The small ranch sat nestled in the shadow of jagged hills, its weathered wood exterior a testament to years of resilience against the unforgiving elements. This was no ordinary farm. It was a sanctuary, built from blood, sweat, and the quiet strength of its owners. Caroline Hayes wiped her hands on her worn jeans as she stepped out of the barn, her golden hair catching the last rays of sunlight. She surveyed the land, her keen blue eyes scanning the horizon as the wind carried with it the faint scent of sagebrush. To an outsider, she looked like any other rancher, a hard-working woman tending to her property, but beneath her soft demeanor lay a fierce spirit. Caroline had faced her share of struggles, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to stand her ground. Her husband, Adam Hayes, was away on a job in Arizona, a trip that had become routine in their marriage. Adam, a retired Delta Force operative, now worked as a security consultant, his skills honed through years of military service. He had seen the worst of humanity in war zones across the globe, but the peaceful life he and Caroline had carved out together was his refuge. Despite his absence, his presence was deeply felt on the ranch. Every corner bore the mark of his handiwork, from the reinforced gates to the carefully hidden emergency supplies. As Caroline leaned against the fence, a faint rumble in the distance caught her attention. Her brow furrowed as she looked toward the dusty road leading to the ranch. A convoy of dark SUVs kicked up a cloud of dust as they approached, their sleek frames and tinted windows an ominous sight against the stark landscape. Her heart tightened as her instincts screamed danger. She had heard the stories. Cartels growing bolder, targeting rural areas for their operations. But she never thought they would come here, to her farm, to her sanctuary. Caroline straightened, her jaw tightening. She knew she was alone, but she wasn't defenseless. This was her home, and she would fight for it. Caroline's grip on the fence tightened as the convoy of dark SUVs slowed, their engines rumbling like predators stalking their prey. Dust billowed around the vehicles, obscuring the license plates and adding to the sense of menace. Her mind raced as she calculated her options. Adam had trained her for situations like this. "Always be prepared," he would say. But this wasn't a drill, and Adam wasn't here. As the first SUV rolled to a stop, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black leather jacket and mirrored sunglasses that reflected the setting sun. Behind him, more men emerged from the other vehicles, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Caroline's stomach churned as she counted at least 8 of them, all armed with pistols or rifles slung over their shoulders. The leader approached the gate, his boots crunching against the gravel. He removed his sunglasses, revealing cold, dark eyes that carried the weight of intimidation. He stopped a few feet from the gate, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth but laced with an unmistakable edge. "Lovely place you've got here." Caroline forced herself to remain calm, her posture relaxed even as her heart raced. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady. The man's smile widened, but it only made him look more predatory. "We're looking for a little hospitality. My friends and I have been on the road for a while, and we could use a place to rest, maybe some food, a drink or two." Caroline's jaw tightened. She knew better than to believe this was a simple request. "This is private property," she said firmly. "You're not welcome here." The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of mock disappointment. "Now, that's no way to treat visitors. We're just trying to be neighborly." Behind him, one of the men chuckled, the sound grating and malicious. Caroline's eyes darted to the others, noting their stances and weapons. These weren't ordinary trespassers. They were cartel men, dangerous and confident, and they weren't going to leave willingly. Inside the house, Caroline's mind raced as she planned her next move. Adam had prepared her for emergencies, and the ranch was fortified with hidden supplies and defenses. She had access to the gun safe in the living room, stocked with a shotgun, a hunting rifle, and a pistol. There were also emergency alarms rigged around the property, simple but effective measures to buy her time if needed. But time wasn't on her side. She needed to act fast. Caroline stepped back from the gate, her hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Wait here," she said, her tone even. "I'll get you some water." The leader tilted his head, studying her. "That's more like it." As she turned and walked toward the house, her heart pounded in her chest. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and immediately moved to the gun safe. Her fingers trembled slightly as she entered the code, but her resolve didn't waver. She grabbed the shotgun and checked the ammunition, her movements quick and practiced. Through the window, she could see the men milling near the SUVs, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. They were confident, too confident, and that made them dangerous. Caroline knew she had to be smarter, faster, and more prepared. Outside, the leader grew impatient. He glanced at one of his men, a wiry figure with a scar running down his cheek. "Go see what's taking her so long," he ordered. The scarred man nodded, his grin cruel as he headed toward the house. He didn't bother with the gate, simply vaulting over it and landing lightly on the other side. Caroline heard the crunch of his boots approaching the porch and moved quickly to position herself near the door, her shotgun ready. The doorknob rattled, followed by a sharp knock. "Hey, lady," the man called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Need some help in there?" Caroline didn't respond, her body tensed and ready. When the man tried the door again, this time more forcefully, she raised the shotgun and aimed at the door. "You'd better step back," she warned, her voice carrying through the thick wooden door. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Feisty, huh? I like that." The man kicked the door, but the reinforced wood held firm. Caroline's finger hovered over the trigger as she heard him muttering something to himself, likely calling for backup. She knew she had only seconds before the situation escalated. Out by the gate, the leader's phone buzzed. He answered it, his expression darkening as he listened. "What do you mean she's not cooperating?" he snapped. He glanced back at the house, his eyes narrowing. "Fine. If she won't play nice, we'll make her." He turned to the other men, his tone sharp. "Move in. Make sure she understands who she's dealing with." The group began advancing toward the house, their weapons at the ready. Caroline watched them approach from the window, her grip on the shotgun tightening. She knew the odds were against her, but she also knew one thing for certain. They had underestimated her. Caroline crouched near the front window, her heart pounding as the cartel members advanced toward the house. The leader barked orders, his sharp tone cutting through the early evening air. The men spread out, moving with the precision of seasoned criminals who had done this before. But Caroline knew she had the advantage of terrain and preparation. This was her home, and she wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. Inside, the shotgun in her hands felt heavy, but its weight was reassuring. Adam had taught her everything he knew about handling firearms, how to shoot and when to shoot, and most importantly, when to hold her ground. His voice echoed in her memory. "Control the chaos. Never let fear take over." From the corner of her eye, she saw movement near the side of the house. One of the men was attempting to slip around the perimeter, likely looking for a way in. Caroline took a deep breath, steadied her aim, and fired a warning shot. The deafening crack of the shotgun shattered the silence, and the man scrambled back, shouting to the others. "She's armed," he yelled, his voice tinged with panic. "Boss, she's not messing around." The leader snarled, his patience wearing thin. "Get back here. We take this house together." Caroline used the brief lull to activate the emergency alarm system Adam had installed. Hidden tripwires and motion sensors lined the edges of the property, and as soon as she hit the switch, a series of loud sirens blared across the ranch. The sudden noise startled the cartel members, forcing them to pause and reassess. From her vantage point, Caroline could see their confusion and frustration. The leader, however, was unshaken. He waved his men forward, shouting, "Ignore the noise. She's just trying to scare us." Meanwhile, miles away, Adam was driving back to the ranch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, and his phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls. When he finally pulled over to check, his stomach dropped. The automated alert from the ranch's alarm system flashed on his screen, accompanied by a live feed from the hidden cameras he had installed. The sight of armed men surrounding his home sent a surge of adrenaline through his veins. He didn't need to think twice. He floored the gas pedal, the powerful engine of his truck roaring to life. Adam's mind raced as he calculated how quickly he could get there. Caroline can handle herself, he reminded himself, but she shouldn't have to face this alone. Back at the ranch, the leader had grown impatient. He motioned to two of his men who approached the front door cautiously. "Force it open," he ordered, his voice low but commanding. Caroline, still positioned near the window, tightened her grip on the shotgun. She knew they would try to breach the house, and she had prepared for it. As the men neared the door, she took aim at a carefully placed canister of tear gas hidden beneath the porch. With a single shot, she hit the trigger mechanism, releasing a thick cloud of gas that engulfed the intruders. The men staggered back, coughing and shouting as the acrid smoke filled their lungs. One of them dropped his weapon, clutching his throat, while the other stumbled into the leader. "What the hell is this?" the leader demanded, his voice muffled by the gas. Inside, Caroline allowed herself a small smile. Adam's ingenuity had paid off, but she knew the tear gas wouldn't stop them for long. The leader regrouped his men at the edge of the property, his frustration boiling over. "Enough games," he snarled. "Burn it down." One of the men hesitated, his eyes darting toward the house. "Boss, if we burn it, we lose what's inside. She might have cash or supplies." "I said burn it," the leader barked, his eyes blazing. "We'll make an example of her." Caroline heard the exchange through the open window, her blood running cold. She quickly moved to the back of the house, grabbing a fire extinguisher and preparing for the worst. The first bottle of gasoline hit the side of the barn, followed by another on the porch. Flames licked at the dry wood, sending up plumes of smoke. But just as the leader prepared to throw a third bottle, the rumble of an approaching truck cut through the chaos. The cartel members turned, their expressions shifting from smug confidence to alarm as Adam's truck barreled down the driveway. The vehicle skidded to a stop, and Adam jumped out, his towering frame silhouetted against the fiery backdrop. Dressed in his tactical gear, he looked every bit the Delta Force operative he once was. His piercing gaze swept over the scene, quickly assessing the situation. "Get away from my house," he growled, his voice carrying across the property like a thunderclap. The leader sneered, raising his pistol. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Adam didn't answer. Instead, he moved with lightning speed, drawing his own weapon and firing a precise shot that disarmed the leader, the pistol flying from his hand. The cartel members scrambled, realizing too late that they had severely underestimated their target. Caroline watched from the window as Adam moved with the precision of a trained soldier, taking down one cartel member after another with calculated efficiency. Relief flooded her chest, but she didn't lower her guard. Grabbing her rifle, she joined Adam outside, ready to finish what they had started. Together, they stood their ground, a united force against the chaos. The cartel had come expecting an easy victory, but they had walked into a nightmare, and by the time the sun fully rose, the Matthews Ranch would be standing strong. The crackle of flames and the sharp reports of gunfire filled the air as Adam moved swiftly across the ranch, neutralizing the remaining cartel members with precise efficiency. Caroline, positioned near the barn with her rifle, provided cover, her sharp aim ensuring none of the intruders could regroup. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, their seamless coordination honed through years of preparation and trust. The leader of the cartel, clutching his injured hand, stumbled toward the SUVs with two of his remaining men. His smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by desperation as he barked orders to his crew. "Get the gear! We're not leaving empty-handed." Adam spotted the movement and sprinted toward the convoy, his boots kicking up dust. His voice boomed, sharp and commanding. "You're not taking another step." The leader froze, his narrowed eyes scanning Adam with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You don't get it, do you?" he snarled. "This isn't just about your little farm." Adam leveled his pistol at the man, his expression unyielding. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" The leader chuckled darkly, his arrogance returning despite the blood dripping from his hand. "This farm isn't the prize. You are." Caroline's heart sank as she overheard the exchange. She stepped closer, her rifle still trained on one of the men near the vehicles. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice sharp. The leader's grin widened, his teeth gleaming in the flickering light of the flames. "You think this is random? That we just stumbled on your pretty little ranch?" He spat on the ground, his gaze flicking between Adam and Caroline. "We've been watching you for months. Your husband here. He's not as invisible as he thinks." Adam's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. "If you're trying to scare me, you're wasting your time." "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you," the leader said, his tone venomous. "I'm just letting you know what's coming. You think you've won? This isn't over. My boss doesn't take kindly to loose ends." Adam stepped closer, the barrel of his pistol just inches from the man's chest. "Who's your boss?" he demanded. The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under Adam's unrelenting gaze. "You'll find out soon enough," he muttered. "And when you do, you'll wish you'd killed me when you had the chance." Suddenly, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Sheriff Harper, a grizzled lawman who had known Adam and Caroline for years, was leading a convoy of local deputies toward the ranch. The cartel leader's face twisted in frustration as he realized his window of escape was closing. Adam grabbed the man by the collar, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to walk away from this, not today." Before the leader could respond, Adam struck him with the butt of his pistol, knocking him unconscious. The two remaining cartel members dropped their weapons and raised their hands, their fear outweighing their loyalty. As the deputies arrived, the scene became a flurry of activity. Sheriff Harper approached Adam and Carolyn, his eyes scanning the damage with a mix of shock and admiration. "You two sure know how to throw a party," he said, his tone gruff but tinged with humor. "Wish it was under better circumstances," Adam replied, lowering his weapon. "But they're not getting away." Harper nodded, motioning for his deputies to secure the captured men. "We'll take it from here. You both did good, better than good." Caroline leaned against the fence, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. "This wasn't just a raid, Sheriff," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "They were after Adam." Harper's brow furrowed. "After Adam? Why?" Adam exchanged a glance with Caroline before answering. "They know who I am. Or at least, they know enough to want me out of the way." The sheriff's expression darkened. "You think this was retaliation? Someone trying to settle a score from your time overseas?" Adam shook his head. "It's bigger than that. Their leader mentioned someone higher up, a boss who doesn't tolerate failure. This isn't over." Harper sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "Then we need to be ready. I'll put a watch on your property and increase patrols in the area." "It's not just about us," Caroline said, her eyes scanning the deputies as they loaded the cartel members into their vehicles. "If they're willing to come this far, they'll target others too." Adam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle it, like we always do." As the sheriff's convoy disappeared down the dirt road, Adam and Caroline stood side by side, watching the sun rise over their battered ranch. The farm had survived the night, but the threat looming on the horizon was far from over. "I should have seen this coming," Adam said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I thought I left that life behind." Caroline turned to him, her expression resolute. "You didn't bring this here, Adam. They did, and we stopped them." "For now," Adam replied, his voice heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. "But they'll be back, and when they come, they'll bring more." Caroline's grip tightened on her rifle. "Then we'll be ready." The ranch was quiet once again, but the silence felt fragile, like the calm before another storm. The smoldering remains of the barn's outer wall and the scattered debris were stark reminders of the chaos that had unfolded just hours earlier. Caroline and Adam stood in the kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows as they reviewed the damage. Their faces, though calm, carried the weight of unspoken fears. Caroline poured 2 cups of coffee, her hands steady despite the tension hanging in the air. She slid a mug across the table to Adam, who sat with his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze distant. "Talk to me," she said, her voice soft but firm. Adam sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "I've faced men like this before, cartels, warlords, you name it. But this feels different. They weren't just here for money or supplies. They wanted to send a message." Caroline nodded, her expression grim. "They know who you are, Adam. That's what makes this personal." He looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with concern. "That's what worries me the most. If they know who I am, they know what I'm capable of. They wouldn't come unless they thought they could handle me. Or worse, that they could use me for something." Caroline took a sip of her coffee, her mind racing. "Do you think this is tied to something from your time in Delta? A mission you were involved in?" Adam shook his head slowly. "Could be, but it doesn't add up. Delta missions are classified, no names, no paper trails. If someone higher up in their organization knows me, it's because they've been digging for a long time." The implications hung heavily between them. Adam's past, the life he had tried so hard to leave behind, had come crashing into their sanctuary. And the worst part was it wasn't over. Meanwhile, in town, Sheriff Harper was poring over files in his cramped office. The cartel leader and his captured men weren't saying much, but the sheriff had learned enough to confirm what Adam suspected. This was no isolated incident. The cartel had been expanding its operations, targeting isolated ranches and towns along the border to establish control. Harper's deputy entered, holding a report. "Sheriff, we got word from another county. A farm about 50 miles from here was hit last week. Same M.O. The owners resisted, and it didn't end well." Harper cursed under his breath. "They're escalating." The deputy hesitated. What do we do about the Hazes? If they're targeting Adam specifically, this isn't going to stop. Harper nodded grimly. We'll keep an eye on them, but let's be honest, Adam's better equipped to handle this than we are. What we need to do is figure out who's giving these orders and shut this down at the source. Back at the ranch, Adam and Caroline worked side by side, repairing what they could. The barn, though damaged, was salvageable, and the hidden compartments Adam had built for their emergency supplies had kept their weapons and essentials intact. Caroline couldn't help but marvel at how prepared her husband had been, even for something as unpredictable as a cartel raid. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" she said, her voice light but filled with admiration. Adam smiled faintly, tightening a bolt on a newly reinforced gate. "I've seen what happens when people aren't prepared. I promised myself that wouldn't be us." Caroline stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "And it wasn't. We made it through because of you." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Because of us. You didn't just survive, Caroline. You fought. You were incredible out there." She gave a small smile, though her eyes betrayed her lingering fear. "I just did what you taught me." "But Adam, if they come back," her voice trailed off, the unspoken words heavy between them. "They will," Adam said quietly. "And next time, they'll bring more men, more firepower. We can't wait for them to make the first move." Caroline frowned, her brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" Adam's gaze hardened, his voice resolute. "I'm saying we need to go on the offensive, find out who's behind this and stop them before they come for us again." Caroline's stomach tightened at the thought, but she knew he was right. Waiting for the next attack wasn't an option. "How do we even begin to do that?" Adam turned toward the house, his mind already working through the logistics. "The leader we captured, he knows more than he's letting on. I'll get what we need from him." Caroline's eyes widened. "Adam, you're not thinking, I'll handle it," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You've done enough, Caroline. Let me take it from here." She wanted to argue, but the determination in his voice stopped her. Instead, she placed a hand on his cheek, her voice soft. "Just promise me you'll come back." Adam covered her hand with his own, his expression filled with unspoken emotion. "I always do." As night fell over the ranch, Adam sat alone in the living room, sharpening a knife while studying a map of the region. He had circled several points of interest, small towns, border crossings, and locations known to be cartel strongholds. His mind was focused, his plan forming piece by piece. Caroline watched from the doorway, her heart heavy with both pride and fear. She knew Adam was capable of handling whatever lay ahead, but she also knew the risks he was taking. The man she loved, the man who had built their sanctuary, was preparing to walk back into a life he had fought so hard to leave behind. But this time, he wasn't doing it for a mission or a country. He was doing it for her, for their home, and for the promise of a future free from fear. The wind howled through the open plains as night blanketed the ranch. The quiet had returned, but for Adam and Caroline, it was anything but peaceful. While Adam meticulously reviewed the map, plotting his next move, Caroline found herself pacing the kitchen, her mind swirling with questions she hadn't dared to ask before. She stopped suddenly and turned to Adam, who sat at the dining table sharpening a combat knife, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone filling the silence. "Adam," she began hesitantly, "if you're going after them, what exactly are you planning to do?" Adam looked up, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers. "Gather intel. Figure out where their operations are based and who's pulling the strings. Once I know that, I'll shut it down." Caroline's chest tightened. "You mean, by yourself?" He set the knife down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I don't have a choice, as Caroline. The sheriff's resources are limited, and this cartel isn't going to stop until they've either taken what they want or been stopped. I can't sit around and wait for them to come back here." Caroline crossed her arms, her voice firm. "Then let me help." Adam's brow furrowed. "No, absolutely not." She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Adam, you trained me for this. I'm not just going to sit here and wait, wondering if you're coming back. If we're in this together, then we're in this together." Adam hesitated, his jaw tightening. He knew Caroline was capable. She had proven that during the raid, but the thought of putting her in harm's way was almost unbearable. "It's too dangerous," he said finally. "You've already been through enough, and so have you," she shot back. "But we're still standing. This is our fight, Adam, not just yours." The weight of her words settled over him, and after a long silence, he gave a reluctant nod. "All right, but if you're coming, we do this my way." Caroline's lips curved into a determined smile. "Deal." The following morning, Adam and Caroline began their preparations. Adam loaded the truck with weapons, ammunition, and survival gear, while Caroline packed supplies, first aid kits, food, and water. They both worked with a quiet efficiency, the gravity of their mission unspoken but deeply felt. Before they left, Adam turned to Caroline, holding her gaze. "Once we leave, there's no turning back. Are you sure about this?" Caroline reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I've never been more sure of anything." Their first stop was Sheriff Harper's office. The sheriff greeted them with a mix of surprise and concern as they walked through the door, their determination evident. "What brings you two into town?" he asked, though he already had a good idea. "We need to talk to the leader," Adam said bluntly. "The one you arrested." Harper frowned, leaning back in his chair. "He's not saying much. Keeps claiming his boss will deal with us soon enough." Adam's jaw tightened. "Then let me talk to him." Harper studied Adam for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but I'll be in the room, and so will my deputy. No funny business." Adam nodded, and Harper led him to the holding cells in the back of the station. Caroline stayed behind, watching through the small window in the door as Adam stepped inside. The cartel leader was slouched on the bench in his cell, his injured hand wrapped in a crude bandage. When he saw Adam, he sneered. "Come to gloat." Adam's expression was unreadable as he approached. "No, I came to make you talk." The leader laughed, the sound bitter. "You really think I'm going to tell you anything? You don't scare me." Adam leaned against the bars, his voice low and calm. "Maybe not, but I know men like you. You're not loyal, you're afraid, and fear makes people do stupid things, like underestimate me." The leader's grin faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You don't know who you're messing with. My boss, he'll make you wish you'd never crossed us." Adam's gaze didn't waver. "Then tell me who he is." For a moment, the leader said nothing, his bravado fading as Adam's unrelenting presence bore down on him. Finally, he muttered, "His name's Ramirez, runs operations on both sides of the border. He's got people everywhere." "Where's his base?" Adam pressed. The leader hesitated, then shook his head. "You think I'm stupid enough to tell you that? Ramirez will kill me if I talk." Adam's expression hardened. "And what do you think I'll do if you don't?" The man swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. All right. He's got a compound just south of the border, near Nogales. But you'll never get close to him. He's got soldiers, security. You're walking into a death trap." Adam straightened, his expression cold. "Thanks for the warning." Back in the sheriff's office, Adam relayed the information to Caroline and Harper. The sheriff shook his head, concern etched into his features. "This Ramirez guy isn't just some small-time thug. He's connected. If you go after him, you're putting a target on your backs." Adam nodded. "I know, but if we don't stop him now, he'll keep coming." Caroline placed a hand on Adam's arm. "We'll stop him. Together." Harper sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll help how I can, but this is bigger than anything we've dealt with before. You two be careful." As they left the sheriff's office and climbed into the truck, Caroline turned to Adam. "What now?" Adam started the engine, his expression resolute. "Now we take the fight to them." The truck's engine hummed steadily as Adam and Caroline drove south, the desert landscape stretching endlessly on either side of the highway. The tension inside the cab was palpable, a heavy silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the police radio Adam had borrowed from Sheriff Harper. The weight of what they were about to do hung between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Caroline adjusted the strap of her rifle, which rested across her lap. She stared out the window, her mind racing with questions she hadn't dared to voice earlier. Finally, she broke the silence. "Adam, do you ever regret it?" He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Regret what?" "All of it," she said, gesturing vaguely. "The training, the missions, the things you've had to do. Do you ever wish you'd chosen a different path?" Adam was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "There are things I've done that I'll never forget," he admitted. "Decisions I made that haunt me. But regret?" He shook his head. "No, because every step I took brought me here. To you, to this life." Caroline's chest tightened, a mixture of pride and sorrow welling up inside her. "But now it's coming back to haunt us." Adam's jaw tightened. "I never thought I'd have to use those skills again. But if it means protecting you, I'd do it 1,000 times over." Caroline reached over, her hand resting on his arm. "I know you would, but I'm not just some helpless farmer's wife, Adam. You trained me to stand my ground, and I'll stand with you no matter what comes." Adam glanced at her again, his expression softening. "I know you will. That's why we're going to get through this." As they neared the border, Adam pulled the truck onto a dirt road, parking it behind a rocky outcropping that provided some cover. He killed the engine and turned to Caroline, his tone serious. "We go in quiet. This isn't about taking down every man Ramirez has. It's about getting to him. Cut off the head and the rest will fall apart." Caroline nodded, checking the safety on her rifle. "What's the plan?" Adam unfolded a detailed map he'd acquired from the sheriff, spreading it across the dashboard. He pointed to a marked location just south of Nogales. "This is the compound. High fences, armed guards, probably surveillance. But here," he tapped a spot near the northern perimeter, "is a blind spot. It's how they move contraband in and out without being seen. That's where we'll enter." Caroline studied the map, her mind already working through the details. "And once we're in, we find Ramirez," Adam said firmly, "and we make sure he can't send anyone after us, or this town, ever again." Caroline's stomach churned at the thought, but she forced herself to focus. "What if we're caught?" Adam met her gaze, his voice steady. "We won't be, but if something goes wrong, you get out. Do you understand me?" Her eyes narrowed. "Adam, no arguments," he interrupted. "If it comes down to it, you go. I need to know you'll be safe." Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but only if you promise me the same." Adam gave her a faint smile. "Deal." As night fell, they approached the compound on foot, their movements silent and deliberate. The faint hum of a generator and the occasional muffled voices of guards were the only sounds breaking the stillness. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her breathing steady, her rifle ready. Adam crouched beside her near the fence, his sharp eyes scanning the perimeter. He pointed to a section of the fence where the ground sloped slightly, creating the blind spot he'd identified earlier. "This is it," he whispered. "Stay close." Using a pair of wire cutters, Adam carefully snipped through the chain-link fence, creating a small opening just large enough for them to slip through. Caroline followed him, her senses on high alert as they moved deeper into the compound. Inside, the compound was a maze of shipping containers, makeshift barracks, and vehicles. Guards patrolled in pairs, their flashlights sweeping across the area. Adam motioned for Caroline to follow him into the shadows of a large container, his movements smooth and practiced. "Ramirez's quarters will be near the center," he whispered. "He'll have the most security." Caroline nodded, her grip on the rifle tightening. "Then we'd better move fast." As they crept closer to the heart of the compound, a sudden noise stopped them in their tracks, a sharp metallic clatter, like a dropped tool. Caroline's eyes darted toward the source, her heart racing as a guard's flashlight beam swept dangerously close to their position. Adam placed a hand on her shoulder, his calm presence grounding her. He motioned for her to stay low as the guard passed, oblivious to their presence. Finally, they reached the main building, a squat, concrete structure with a single guarded entrance. Adam pulled Caroline into the shadows, his voice barely audible. "We'll need a distraction." Caroline reached into her pack, pulling out a small smoke grenade Adam had insisted they bring. She gave him a faint smile. "How's this for a distraction?" Adam smirked. "Perfect." With a flick of her wrist, Caroline sent the grenade rolling toward a nearby truck. Moments later, thick smoke billowed into the air, setting off a flurry of activity among the guards. As they moved to investigate, Adam and Caroline slipped into the building unnoticed. Inside, the stakes were higher than ever, and they both knew the next few minutes could determine their fate. The interior of the compound's main building was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering ominously. The air smelled of metal and diesel fuel, a stark contrast to the crisp desert air outside. Adam and Caroline moved silently down the narrow hallway, their weapons ready. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of machinery, felt amplified in the tense stillness. At the far end of the hallway, muffled voices emanated from behind a heavy steel door. Adam held up a hand, signaling Caroline to stop. He crouched low and pressed his ear to the door, his expression sharpening as he listened. "He's still holed up in there," Adam whispered, turning to Caroline. "But he's not alone." "How many?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Adam frowned. "At least 3 guards, maybe more. Ramirez will have his best men with him." Caroline's heart pounded. but she kept her breathing steady. "So, Yang, what's the plan?" Adam's lips curled into a faint, determined smile. "We split their focus. I'll go through the door and draw their attention. You take the side entrance we passed earlier and flank them. Hit them from behind." Caroline hesitated for a moment, her eyes locking onto his. "You better not get yourself killed." Adam gave her a reassuring nod. "I've got this. Just be ready." Caroline slipped back down the hallway, retracing their steps to the side entrance. Her nerves were on edge, but her resolve was unshakable. Adam had trained her for moments like this, and she wasn't about to let him down. She reached the side door, which was slightly ajar, and peered inside. The room beyond was a large, open space filled with crates and scattered furniture. Ramirez and his guards stood near the center, unaware of her presence. Ramirez was exactly as Adam had described him, a lean, sharp-featured man with a dangerous air of authority. He was speaking rapidly in Spanish, his tone frustrated but controlled. Caroline didn't need to understand the words to know he was planning his next move. Back at the steel door, Adam took a deep breath, steadying himself. He gripped the handle and, in one swift motion, kicked the door open. The sound echoed through the room, drawing the attention of Ramirez and his men. Adam stepped inside, his pistol raised, his voice calm but commanding. "Ramirez," he said, his tone cutting through the tension. "This ends now." The guards reacted immediately, raising their weapons and fanning out to surround him. Ramirez, however, didn't flinch. He turned slowly, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, the infamous Adam Hayes," he said, his voice smooth and taunting. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Adam didn't lower his weapon. "You've been sending your men after me and my family. Big mistake." Ramirez chuckled, his dark eyes gleaming. "Oh, Adam, this isn't just about you. You're a small piece of a much larger puzzle." Before Adam could respond, Ramirez nodded to his guards, and chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Adam moved with practiced precision, diving behind a stack of crates as bullets whizzed past him. He returned fire, taking down one of the guards with a single, well-placed shot. Caroline heard the commotion and knew it was her moment to strike. She slipped into the room, staying low as she moved behind a row of crates. Her heart raced as she lined up her first shot, aiming for a guard whose back was turned. The crack of her rifle echoed, and the man crumpled to the ground. The sudden attack from behind threw Ramirez's men into disarray. One of the guards spun around, firing wildly in her direction, but Caroline was already moving, staying out of sight as she picked her next target. She caught a glimpse of Adam in the chaos, his movements fluid and calculated as he took down another guard. Ramirez, realizing his position was compromised, shouted to his remaining men, "Hold them off! I'll deal with him myself." He pulled a sleek black pistol from his holster and began firing at Adam, who ducked behind a large crate for cover. Ramirez's shots were precise, forcing Adam to stay pinned down. Caroline saw the danger and knew she had to act fast. She moved to a better position, taking aim at Ramirez. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but before she could fire, Ramirez suddenly turned, his sharp eyes locking onto her. He raised his pistol, a cold smile on his face. "You must be the wife," he said, his tone mocking. "Your husband has taught you well." Caroline didn't flinch. "He taught me enough." She pulled the trigger just as Ramirez fired. The sound of both shots filled the room, followed by a heavy silence. Ramirez staggered back, clutching his shoulder where Caroline's bullet had struck. His own shot had missed, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in the wall behind her. Adam seized the moment, emerging from his cover and closing the distance between them. He disarmed Ramirez with a swift, practiced motion, sending the pistol skidding across the floor. Pinning Ramirez against a crate, Adam growled, "It's over." Ramirez coughed, blood staining his lips, but his smirk didn't waver. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. "You've only delayed the inevitable. My people will come for you." Adam's grip tightened. "Let them try." As the last guard fell, the room fell silent once more. Caroline joined Adam, her rifle still in hand, her breathing heavy but controlled. Adam turned to her, his expression softening for a moment. "You did good." "So did you," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Together they stood over Ramirez, who glared at them with defiance even as his strength waned. The fight wasn't over, not entirely, but for now they had won this battle. The dust settled inside the compound's main room, and the echoes of gunfire faded into the still night. Adam and Caroline stood side by side, their breaths steadying as the adrenaline began to wane. Ramirez slumped against a crate, blood seeping from his shoulder where Caroline's bullet had struck. His sharp features twisted in pain, but the defiance in his eyes remained. Adam crouched down, grabbing Ramirez by the collar and forcing him to meet his gaze. "It's over," Adam said coldly. "Your men are gone and you're not walking out of here. Tell me everything, who's backing you, where your other operations are, and why you've been targeting me." Ramirez chuckled weakly, his voice rasping but still laced with venom. "You think killing me will solve your problem? I'm just a piece of the machine, Hayes. There's always someone else waiting to take my place." Caroline, her rifle still at the ready, stepped closer. "Maybe, but if we cut you out, it's a start. Now talk." Ramirez's gaze shifted to Caroline, a faint smirk curling his lips. "You've got fire, I'll give you that. It's almost a shame to waste you in the middle of nowhere with a washed-up soldier." Adam's fist slammed into the crate beside Ramirez's head, silencing him. "Enough," Adam growled. "You're going to tell us what we need to know, or I'll make sure you regret every decision that brought you here." For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed Ramirez's face. He swallowed hard, his bravado cracking under Adam's unrelenting presence. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll talk, but it won't change anything." As Ramirez reluctantly began spilling information about the Cartels network, Caroline's mind raced. She could see the weight of Adam's past on him in the way he questioned Ramirez, his tone sharp, his movements deliberate, his entire demeanor that of a man who had spent years dealing with dangerous enemies. It wasn't a side of him she often saw, but tonight, it was necessary. "Ramirez operates under someone bigger," Adam explained later as they exited the compound, dragging Ramirez along in makeshift restraints. "He's a mid-level boss, but the real power is a man named Vargas. He's the one coordinating operations on both sides of the border." Caroline frowned, her grip tightening on her rifle. "And Ramirez was sent after us because of you." Adam nodded, his jaw tightening. "Vargas sees me as a threat, someone who knows how to dismantle their operations. He's not wrong, but I didn't think he'd escalate this quickly." Caroline glanced back at Ramirez, who shuffled behind them, his head hanging low. "So, what do we do with him?" Adam's voice was firm. "We turn him over to Sheriff Harper. He'll hold Ramirez while I figure out our next move." By the time they reached their truck, dawn was breaking over the horizon, casting a pale light across the desert. Adam secured Ramirez in the back seat, his hands bound with zip ties, while Caroline climbed into the passenger seat. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them both, but the sense of accomplishment and survival kept them moving. As they drove back toward Riverbend, Ramirez stirred, his voice breaking the silence. "You think the sheriff can protect you? Vargas has people everywhere. You'll never see them coming." Adam didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the road. Caroline turned in her seat, her gaze sharp. "We've handled everything you've thrown at us so far. Don't underestimate what we're capable of." Ramirez laughed bitterly. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery only gets you so far." Back in Riverbend, Sheriff Harper was waiting for them at his office, flanked by 2 deputies. His expression was a mix of relief and concern as Adam and Caroline pulled up, dragging a sullen Ramirez out of the truck. "Well, I'll be damned," Harper said, eyeing Ramirez. "You two really went and did it, didn't you?" Adam gave a curt nod. "He's got information about the Cartel's network, including a man named Vargas. You'll want to keep him under maximum security." Harper's expression darkened. "Vargas? I've heard that name before. He's bad news, Adam. You sure you want to keep poking this hornet's nest?" Adam's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice. As long as Vargas is out there, he's a threat to my family and this town." Harper sighed, motioning for his deputies to take Ramirez inside. "All right, I'll do what I can to keep him locked up, but you'd better be ready for whatever comes next." As they left the sheriff's office, Caroline finally allowed herself to relax, leaning against Adam as they walked to the truck. "We did it," she said softly. "At least for now." Adam wrapped an arm around her, his expression softening. "We're not out of the woods yet, but yeah, we made it through the worst." Caroline looked up at him, her blue eyes filled with determination. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Adam nodded, his resolve matching hers. Together. That evening, back at the ranch, the 2 of them sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The danger wasn't gone, not entirely, but for the first time in days, they felt a sense of peace. The fight with Ramirez was over, But the battle against Vargas loomed on the horizon, and when the time came, Adam and Caroline knew they would be ready. The calm at the Matthews Ranch didn't last long. The following morning, as Adam and Caroline worked to repair the damage left behind by the Cartels' raid, Sheriff Harper arrived in his dusty patrol truck, his face grim. The moment Adam saw the sheriff's expression, he knew something had gone wrong. "They've already made their move," Harper said as he stepped out of the truck, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Adam wiped his hands on a rag, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" The sheriff handed him a slip of paper, a hastily written note left at the county jail. The message was short and chilling. "You have something of ours. Return Ramirez, or we'll burn everything down." Caroline read the note over Adam's shoulder, her stomach sinking. "They know where we are," she whispered. Harper nodded, his tone grave. "They've been watching. My deputies spotted a black SUV on the outskirts of town early this morning. By the time we got there, it was gone." Adam's mind raced as he pieced the situation together. "This is Vargas sending a message. He wants us to know he's in control." Harper placed a hand on his hip, frustration etched into his features. "We've got Ramirez locked up tight. But this Vargas character doesn't seem like the kind of man who takes no for an answer." "He's not," Adam replied. "But returning Ramirez isn't an option. That would only embolden them." Caroline stepped closer, her voice steady despite the fear brewing inside her. "So, what do we do? Wait for them to attack?" Adam shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, we take the fight to them." Back at the ranch, Adam and Caroline prepared for what they knew would be a dangerous mission. The intel they had gathered from Ramirez painted a clear picture. Vargas was operating out of a heavily fortified compound just across the border. It wouldn't be an easy target. But Adam knew that leaving Vargas unchecked would only lead to more bloodshed. Caroline loaded ammunition into a rifle as Adam reviewed the compound's layout on a map spread across the dining table. "Are you really think we can do this?" she asked, her tone equal parts determination and doubt. Adam looked up, his gaze unwavering. "We don't have a choice. If we wait for Vargas to come to us, he'll hit us when we're least prepared. We need to end this now." Caroline nodded, her resolve firming. "Then let's make sure he doesn't get the chance." As night fell, Adam and Caroline left the ranch, their truck loaded with weapons, supplies, and enough grit to face whatever lay ahead. The drive to the border was long and quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. Both of them were lost in their own thoughts, preparing for what felt like a final stand. When they reached the border, Adam pulled the truck into a secluded spot hidden by a cluster of rocks. From there, they would continue on foot to avoid detection. The moonlight cast a pale glow over the desert, illuminating the path ahead. Adam handed Caroline a small radio, his voice calm but firm. "Stay close. We'll need to move quickly once we're inside." Caroline nodded, slipping the radio into her pocket. "Got it." The pair moved through the darkness with practiced ease, their footsteps silent on the sandy terrain. As they neared the compound, the faint glow of floodlights came into view, accompanied by the distant murmur of voices and the occasional clatter of equipment. The sight of the heavily guarded perimeter only reinforced the gravity of their mission. Adam motioned for Caroline to crouch beside him behind a rocky outcrop. He pointed to the guards patrolling the perimeter, his voice a whisper. 4 guards on the east side, 2 at the gate. "We'll take the east side first." Quietly, Caroline gave a quick nod, gripping her rifle tightly. "I'll follow your lead." The first guard never saw them coming. Adam moved like a shadow, his knife flashing in the moonlight as he subdued the man without a sound. Caroline followed close behind, her movements steady and controlled as she covered Adam's back. Together, they neutralized the remaining guards on the east side, leaving the gate vulnerable. But as they approached the compound's main building, a voice crackled over the radio clipped to one of the guards' belts. "East perimeter. Report in." Adam and Caroline exchanged a tense glance. They had seconds to act before the alarm was raised. "Inside," Adam whispered, motioning toward the main building. Now, once inside, the tension reached a breaking point. The hallways were dimly lit, and the air was thick with the smell of oil and sweat. Adam's sharp instincts guided them as they navigated the labyrinthine layout, their every step calculated. They reached a large central room where Vargas and his men were gathered around a table covered in maps and documents. Vargas, a tall, imposing figure with a scar running down his cheek, exuded a cold, menacing authority. "You think you can come into my territory and take what's mine," Vargas said, his voice cutting through the room as Adam and Caroline stepped into view, their weapons raised. "How you made this personal?" Adam replied, his tone ice-cold. "It ends here," Vargas smirked, motioning to his men. "Then come and get me." The room erupted into chaos as gunfire rang out, the final confrontation between Adam and Vargas's cartel erupting into a deadly battle. Caroline and Adam moved as one, their training and trust carrying them through the chaos as they fought to end the threat once and for all. The central room exploded into chaos as gunfire echoed off the concrete walls. Adam and Caroline moved like a well-oiled machine, their every action coordinated and deliberate. Bullets ricocheted off crates and metal beams, filling the room with the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke. Adam crouched behind a steel column, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Vargas's men had taken defensive positions, firing relentlessly to keep him and Caroline pinned down. But Adam knew better than to rush. Patience was key in a fight like this. He signaled to Caroline, who had taken cover behind a stack of crates on the opposite side of the room. Caroline nodded, her grip tightening on her rifle. She peeked out from her cover and fired a precise shot, taking down one of Vargas's men. The cartel soldier crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering beside him. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, but her heart raced with the adrenaline of the moment. "Good shot," Adam called out, his voice calm despite the chaos. He used the distraction to move closer to Vargas, who stood at the far end of the room barking orders to his men. "Pin them down! Don't let them close in!" Vargas shouted, his voice cutting through the gunfire. He pulled a pistol from his holster, his cold gaze scanning the room for Adam. The intensity of the firefight escalated as Vargas's men began flanking from both sides, trying to trap Adam and Caroline in a deadly crossfire. Adam's mind raced as he calculated their next move. They needed to take control of the room before they were overwhelmed. He spotted a stack of propane canisters near the center of the room, their bright yellow labels warning of their volatile contents. An idea sparked in his mind. "Caroline!" he called, pointing to the canisters. "Aim for the tanks on my signal." Caroline followed his gaze, her eyes widening as she understood the plan. She adjusted her position, her rifle trained on the canisters. "Ready when you are," she replied. Adam waited for the right moment, his instincts honed by years of combat. As Vargas's men advanced, he stepped out of cover and fired a shot, drawing their attention. "Now, Caroline!" he shouted. Caroline squeezed the trigger, her shot striking one of the canisters dead on. The explosion that followed was deafening, a fiery blast that knocked Vargas's men off their feet and filled the room with smoke and chaos. Amid the confusion, Adam and Caroline pressed their advantage, moving swiftly through the room. Adam took out 2 more guards with precise shots, his movements fluid and controlled. Caroline covered his flank, her sharp eyes scanning for any remaining threats. Vargas, disoriented but uninjured, staggered to his feet, his pistol raised. His cold demeanor had given way to frustration and desperation as he realized his men were falling one by one. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled, his voice echoing through the smoky room. "I've got an army!" "You're just 2 people. Adam advanced toward him, his weapon trained on Vargas. "2 people who just took down your entire operation," he said coldly. "Drop the gun, Vargas. It's over." Vargas's eyes narrowed, his grip on the pistol tightening. "I don't have the guts," he spat, his finger inching toward the trigger. Caroline stepped out from behind cover, her rifle aimed squarely at Vargas's chest. "Try us," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint crackle of flames from the explosion. Vargas's gaze shifted between Adam and Caroline, calculating his chances. Finally, with a snarl of defeat, he lowered his pistol and let it fall to the ground. Adam wasted no time, stepping forward and restraining Vargas with zip ties. "You've made a lot of enemies, Vargas," he said, his tone sharp. "But you made the biggest mistake of your life coming after my family." Vargas glared at him, his voice dripping with venom. "You think this is over? There's always someone waiting to take my place." Adam leaned in closer, his eyes cold. "Then we'll be ready for them." As the gunfire ceased and the dust began to settle, Adam and Caroline took a moment to catch their breath. The room was littered with the aftermath of the battle, spent shell casings, scattered debris, and the bodies of Vargas's men. But the fight was finally over, and they had won. Caroline looked at Adam, her chest heaving as the adrenaline coursed through her veins began to fade. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Adam nodded, his expression softening. "You were incredible out there." She smiled faintly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I learned from the best." As they dragged Vargas out of the compound, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange. Adam and Caroline knew that their fight wasn't just for their family. It was for their home, their town, and the quiet life they had worked so hard to build. Sheriff Harper and his deputies were waiting for them at the border, their faces filled with relief as Adam and Caroline handed Vargas over. "You two have done more than anyone could have asked," Harper said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Riverbend owes you?" Adam glanced at Caroline, his expression resolute. "We just did what needed to be done." As Vargas was hauled away in the sheriff's cruiser, Adam and Caroline stood by the edge of the desert, watching the vehicle disappear down the dirt road. The early morning sun bathed the landscape in a warm glow, but the weight of the last 24 hours lingered heavily in the air. They had won this battle, but the war with the cartel was far from over. Caroline leaned against the truck, her rifle still slung over her shoulder, and exhaled deeply. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice quiet. Adam shook his head, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not yet." Vargas was a major player, but he wasn't the only one. There are still others in his network who'll want to retaliate. Caroline nodded, her expression resolute. "Then we'll deal with them if they come, just like we did this time." Adam turned to her, his eyes softening. "You shouldn't have to live like this, Caroline. Always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next fight. I wanted this place to be a sanctuary for us, not a battleground." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "It is a sanctuary, but it's worth fighting for, Adam. And if we don't stand our ground, who will?" Her words struck a chord with him, and he gave a faint nod. "You're right. We've come too far to let anyone take this from us." They returned to the ranch later that morning, the scars of the recent battles still visible. Burnt wood from the barn's outer wall, scattered shell casings near the front porch, and the faint smell of smoke reminded them of the price they had paid to protect their home. Caroline immediately began assessing the damage, her practical nature taking over. "We'll need to reinforce the barn," she said, running her hand over the charred beams, "and replace the locks on the gates." Adam joined her, his mind already planning the repairs. "I'll call in some supplies. We'll get this place back in shape." As they worked, the rhythm of the familiar tasks brought a sense of normalcy, but even as they patched up the barn and repaired the fences, the unspoken tension between them remained. Both knew that their fight with the cartel wasn't truly over. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adam and Caroline sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the stars begin to appear. The quiet was comforting, but it felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. "I've been thinking," Adam said, breaking the silence, "about Ramirez and what he said about Vargas's network. There's still a lot we don't know. How deep it runs, who else is involved." Caroline frowned, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "You're not planning on going after them, are you?" Adam hesitated, his gaze drifting to the distant hills. "If we don't, they'll come after us again. I need to make sure they can't." Caroline set her mug down, her voice firm. "Then we do it together. I'm not letting you go off on your own." Adam looked at her, his expression torn. "Caroline, I don't want to drag you into this any more than I already have." "You didn't drag me into anything," she said, her blue eyes blazing with determination. "This is my home, too, and I'm not going to sit back and wait for them to come knocking again." He sighed, a mixture of pride and concern washing over him. "You've always been stubborn. Wonder where I got that from," she said with a faint smile. As the stars filled the night sky, a distant sound broke the tranquility, a faint rumble, like the growl of an approaching storm. Adam's sharp instincts kicked in, and he stood, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. Caroline followed his gaze, her hand instinctively reaching for her rifle. "What is it?" Adam's voice was low, his body tense. "Engines!" "More than one." The rumble grew louder, and soon the headlights of multiple vehicles appeared on the horizon, their beams cutting through the night. Adam's mind raced as he assessed the situation. "They're coming," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Get inside, now." Caroline didn't argue. She moved quickly, grabbing the emergency radio and securing the doors as Adam gathered weapons from their hidden stash. The ranch was fortified, but the sight of the approaching convoy sent a chill down her spine. As the vehicles came to a stop at the edge of the property, Adam positioned himself near a second-story window, his rifle trained on the intruders. Caroline joined him, her pulse steady despite the tension. Together, they watched as a group of men stepped out of the vehicles, their silhouettes barely visible in the faint moonlight. A voice called out from the lead vehicle, sharp and commanding. "Adam Hayes, you've made a lot of enemies." "It's time to settle the score." Adam's grip on his rifle tightened, his expression hardening. "They don't know who they're dealing with," he muttered. Caroline glanced at him, her voice steady. "Then let's show them." The standoff was charged with tension, the ranch once again becoming a battlefield. Adam and Caroline knew this would be the defining moment, the final stand against the forces that had threatened their home. As they prepared to defend everything they held dear, they were more united than ever, their bond forged in the fires of survival. The convoy of vehicles remained motionless at the edge of the Matthews property, their engines rumbling like predators waiting to pounce. The men who stepped out were heavily armed, their dark silhouettes stark against the moonlit desert. Adam crouched near the second-story window of the farmhouse, his rifle steady as he surveyed the intruders. Caroline knelt beside him, her weapon ready, her breathing calm despite the storm brewing outside. 10, maybe 12, Adam murmured, his sharp eyes counting the figures. "They're spreading out." Caroline peered through her scope, her finger hovering over the trigger. "They're trying to box us in," she said quietly. "Cut off our exits." Adam nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Let them try." The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone used to being in control. "Adam Hayes," he called, his voice echoing across the property. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long. Vargas might be gone, but you've made yourself a target." Adam didn't respond, his gaze locked on the man. He recognized the type, an enforcer, sent to clean up loose ends and restore order. This wasn't just a raid. It was a message. The man continued, his tone sharp. "You have one chance. Come out now and we'll make this quick. Resist and we'll burn this place to the ground." Caroline glanced at Adam, her jaw tightening. "What's the play?" Adam's lips curled into a faint smirk. "We make them regret stepping onto our land." Adam moved quickly, his mind racing as he prepared for the inevitable firefight. He handed Caroline a pair of radios, one for her and one for the emergency channel connected to Sheriff Harper's office. "Call Harper. Tell him what's happening. If we don't stop them here, they'll head for the town." Caroline nodded, grabbing the radio. "What about us?" Adam's gaze was resolute. "We hold them off as long as we can." She touched his arm, her voice firm. "Together." He gave her a small nod. "Always." The first shot shattered the tense silence. A cartel soldier fired toward the house, the bullet striking one of the wooden beams on the porch. Adam responded instantly, his rifle cracking as he took the man down with a single, precise shot. Chaos erupted as the remaining intruders opened fire, their bullets peppering the side of the house. Caroline crouched near the staircase, returning fire with her rifle. Each shot was deliberate, her sharp aim taking out one of the men attempting to flank the house. "That's two down," she called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Adam moved to another window, his military instincts guiding him. He fired a round at the truck nearest the barn, hitting its engine block and sending smoke billowing into the night. The vehicle sputtered and died, cutting off one of the cartel's escape routes. Outside, the leader barked orders, his frustration growing. "Push forward. They're just two people." But Adam and Caroline fought like a full battalion, their coordinated efforts keeping the cartel at bay. Adam's training and Caroline's determination created a formidable defense, each of them covering the other's blind spots. As the firefight raged, a sudden explosion rocked the property. One of the cartel soldiers had tossed a grenade toward the barn, igniting a stack of propane canisters stored nearby. The blast sent a plume of fire into the sky, lighting up the night and creating a moment of disarray. Caroline shielded her face from the heat, her heart pounding as she realized the barn was ablaze. "Adam, the fire! I see it!" Adam shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Focus on the fight." The blaze created a chaotic backdrop as Adam and Caroline continued to repel the attackers, but they knew they couldn't hold out forever. Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. Sheriff Harper's convoy of patrol vehicles appeared on the horizon, their lights flashing like beacons of hope. The cartel soldiers hesitated, their confidence wavering as reinforcements arrived. Harper's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "This is Sheriff Harper. Drop your weapons and surrender, or we'll open fire." The sight of the sheriff's deputies pouring onto the property was enough to break the cartel's resolve. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands, realizing they were outmatched. The leader, however, refused to yield. He turned to Adam, his eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled, raising his pistol. Before he could fire, Caroline stepped out of the house, her rifle trained on him. "Drop it," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. The man hesitated, his grip tightening on the pistol. But Adam stepped beside her, his weapon also raised. Together, they formed an unbreakable front, their determination palpable. The leader's bravado crumbled, and with a growl of frustration, he tossed the pistol to the ground. Harper's deputies moved in swiftly, securing the remaining cartel members. As the dawn broke over the ranch, the firefight was over, and the cartel was defeated. Adam and Caroline stood side by side, their weapons lowered but their spirits unshaken. The ranch bore the scars of battle, but it was still standing, a testament to their resilience and strength. Harper approached them, his expression a mix of gratitude and admiration. "So you two just saved this town?" Adam glanced at Caroline, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We saved our home." Caroline smiled faintly, her exhaustion evident, but her resolve unwavering. "And we'll keep doing it. Together." As the sun climbed higher over the Matthews Ranch, the battlefield transformed back into a sanctuary. The barn smoldered, the smell of burnt wood lingering in the air, and the property bore fresh scars from the firefight. But the house still stood, and so did Adam and Caroline. Caroline leaned against the porch railing, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. The adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. She watched as the last of Sheriff Harper's deputies loaded the captured cartel members into their patrol cars. Vargas's network had sent their best entourage, and they'd been stopped. For now, Adam emerged from the house, his face smudged with dirt and a faint cut on his brow. Despite everything, he looked calm, his expression resolute. He carried a bucket of water, which he poured over the last embers of the barn fire. "That should do it," he said, his voice steady. Caroline turned to him, her lips curving into a tired smile. "Do you think it's finally over?" Adam walked to her, wiping his hands on a rag. "For now," he said, leaning on the railing beside her. "But Vargas's network is still out there. This isn't the end of the fight." She sighed, her gaze drifting across the scorched fields. "Then what happens next? Do we just keep waiting for the next attack?" Adam placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "No, we rebuild, we prepare, and we make sure that if anyone else comes looking for trouble, they find out this place isn't worth the fight." Caroline nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. "We've lost so much," she said softly, "but we're still here." Adam's grip on her shoulder tightened gently, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Because we didn't give up. You didn't give up." Sheriff Harper approached, his hat in hand, his expression serious but tinged with admiration. "You two did something most people couldn't even imagine," he said. "You stood your ground and stopped them from tearing this place apart. That takes guts." Adam nodded. "Thanks, Sheriff, but we couldn't have done it without your help." Harper smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you've set an example, Adam, for this town, for the people here. You've shown them what it means to fight for what you believe in." He paused, looking between Adam and Caroline. "If you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me." Caroline smiled warmly. "Thank you, Sheriff, that means a lot." Harper tipped his hat and walked back to his truck, leaving the couple alone on the porch as the last patrol car disappeared down the dusty road. As the quiet returned, Caroline turned to Adam, her blue eyes filled with determination. "We've been through so much, Adam, but every time they try to break us, we come out stronger." He looked at her, his own resolve mirroring hers. "Because we have each other. That's something no cartel or enemy can take from us." Caroline rested her head on his shoulder, the weight of the night finally lifting. "You're right, and no matter what happens, we'll face it together." Adam placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, his voice soft but firm. "Always." Over the next few days, Adam and Caroline began rebuilding the ranch. Neighbors and friends from Riverbend came to lend a hand, bringing supplies, tools, and words of encouragement. The barn was repaired, the fences reinforced, and the fields cleaned of debris. The ranch slowly began to look like home again. For Caroline, Each nail she hammered and every plank she placed felt like reclaiming a piece of their lives. For Adam, it was a reminder of why he had left his old life behind to build something worth protecting. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fields in hues of gold and orange, Adam and Caroline sat on the porch, their hands intertwined. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds the soft rustle of the wind and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Caroline broke the silence, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever stop? The people like Vargas? The ones who think they can take whatever they want?" Adam exhaled deeply, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Probably not, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting. This ranch, this town, it's worth it." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And so are we." Adam's arm wrapped around her, pulling her close. "Yeah, we are." This story of resilience, courage, and unbreakable love reminds us all of the power of standing together against adversity. Adam and Caroline's determination to protect their home is a testament to the strength that lies within us all when we fight for what truly matters. If you were inspired by this tale, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of courage, survival, and the human spirit. What would you do to protect the ones you love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay tuned for our next story, a tale of redemption, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds that tie us together. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes.